So I've been meaning to make this one for a while, but it's just I've been a little lazy on this because I haven't really been in the mood to make this kind of thing, but I figured I might as well do it now. I'll make one thing clear right off the bat is that I'm not going to be using any skins for this, just mainly because of two things. One, skins will make it a little more complicated because a skin could either be here or here. And another thing is that just for the sake of, time, I don't want to waste your time by, this skin goes here, this skin goes here, this skin goes here. No, we're just straight to the point. I could do that another time, but for now, I'm just going to stick to the base stuff. And I'll be rating them off of three things. One, I'll be rating them off of their ease of use, aka how easy it is to pick up when you first get it. Two, how good it is when you don't know how to use it, and how good it is when you're actually skilled with it. All those two factors will be done when ranking them in the tier list. Now, as for how this tier list's how do I say this? As for how good this tier list is just kind of up to you. Because again, how good a character is completely subjective. And I am going to be ranking them separately because I feel like some characters are carried by their first/second phases, and vice versa, yada yada, you get the point. So we'll start off with Littletail. Since I'm going to be using base Little for this, and I'm going to assume that this is maxed out Littletail, I'm going to put him at A. I don't think he's an A plus or S, but I think that just the amount of stamina he has and the ability to draw out games for very long is a really nice thing to have. He's pretty easy to pick up, assuming that you start off in a low-end server, and he has the candy, which is actually a really helpful healing item. Yeah, it's not as good as the little killer one, but it's still a really nice thing to have, because not only does it help minimize the amount of time you spend AFK, and you actually have more time to walk around and dodge stuff, but it's also a really nice tool to have just for safekeeping. If you want your stamina to be higher at any time, you can always just have a little chomp and then get 20 stamina back. I think it's really nice for a beginner character. I think this is worth maxing out, honestly. Now, is it worth more than this one, for example? No, but is it still good? Yeah, I think it's good, and therefore it should stay in A. I don't think it's overpowered or really, really good to where I could put it here, but I think it's just good enough to where I could put it in A. So I think A is the most justifiable place for it. Pacifist, you don't need to hear my ramble on this, do you? He has no good offensive abilities, really. His blasters is really slow. His bone rush can do a little damage, but it doesn't do that much. His one bone is unironically the most damaging move in his kit, but it almost never hits because of how slow it is, unless you catch people off guard. Which, albeit, this is probably the worst stance to grind wins XP for, because getting a kill with it is so difficult because of how low damaging his moves are. Now, joking aside, on the other hand, he isn't amazing. Don't get me wrong. He's not the best in the world, but the thing about him that makes me want to put him in B, right? I was gonna put him in C, but I feel like he's good enough for B. He's okay. He's pretty heavily carried by his Bone Zone. His Bone Zone is undeniably the best move in your kit, and if you can use it properly, then you can actually get quite a few people off guard. Hell, you can get a bunch of kills with this. I would put it higher if this was pre-pacifist, maybe A or A+. But since this is not pre-pacifist, I'm keeping him here. Now this is Neutral's final phase. This one just depends on how badly you're getting rushed, the weapons being used, yada yada. Oh, and I forgot to mention, the ease of use for this one kind of just depends, because some people I know found it really easy to pick up this guy, and some people I found didn't. And because of how it might be hard for some people to use this guy, and realize just how good Bone Zone is, I'm going to drop him down to C. But for Neutral, this one's a bit... what's the word for this? So, this one just depends on the weapons that people have in specific. If they're pretty far away from you, or there's only one guy close, this is kind of good because of the spamming, how much spam you can do. It spams a lot, it does a lot of damage, and it has good map control. It's pretty easy to use since all you have to do is spam, and if you're pretty good with Neutral, then you'll know what moves to use and what not to use. Even if it's spam, it's smart spam. And I think because of all of those things taken into account, give or take, I think B is fair for this. Because it's pretty easy to use, and there's not too much that changes with skill, but there are still some changes that you'll notice when you've used this guy for a while. It's a good last resort for neutral, I would say. Science. This one's also a B, to be honest. But science isn't exactly the most overpowered thing in the world. He's not bad. That's one thing for sure, is that he's not bad. And even if you don't know how to use him, right, I'm going to assume this is max upgrades, he is pretty good. His blasters at max upgrade are pretty much have no downfalls. They do a pretty good amount of damage, and even if they don't hit, you can still hide in them to get some stamina back because they explode. Your MTTs are really good for catching people off guard when you use your laser walls, because the blue laser walls happen every single time, and sometimes when people are standing still, they won't notice the MTTs that are dropping from the sky, which guarantee pretty good damage for such a small and tiny robot. Now, is it A tier? I don't know. I would put it in A tier if it was just for people who are skilled with it, because I've seen some really good science users, but the problem is that not everyone is going to be good at science. Science is kind of a science that takes a little bit of know-how to get good with, and for that reason I don't think I can put him A tier or above. And now, Papyrus. Okay. Base Papyrus without skins is not that good. Matter of fact, I don't know if I should put him in F or D. Because on one hand, you have the Royal Jump, which is probably your best move, but besides Royal Jump, you don't really have anything else in your kit. All of your moves just rely on Blue Soul, which, even then, if people have 2 brain cells, they'll be able to just mitigate that anyway. So I feel like putting him in F is about the fairest result I can give him. Same thing with Negatail, but I'd put him in D, because Negatail actually has pretty good damage opposed to Papyrus. Papyrus's damage is good, but it's mostly in 1 intervals. Negatail's hits for more than once at a time, a good portion of the time when you use his moves. So, as for these two, I'd say Negatail is better. His attacks get faster, especially with the upgrade, and he has pretty decent moves, I would say. I mean, he's not the best, obviously, which is why I'm not putting him higher. And he's not that great. If you're skilled with him, maybe he would go here. But I feel like for someone who doesn't know how to use him, he'd probably just stay here, to be honest. The grind for Negatail is pretty rough. And the only time I see you being able to get any good runs with this guy is in low-end servers. That's assuming there isn't a recent guy in there too, because if there is, you basically lose. Unless you get lucky and the guy just forgets to play or something. Negative. Okay, this one, negative, I'm a bit iffy on this one. Because on one hand, people who are really good with him, and this will apply to true form as well, people who are really good with him make him seem a lot better than he probably is. Ease of use, I would say he's decently easy to use. It's pretty simple to understand the basics, but it's hard to master. So I think putting them both at B makes sense. Now, I don't know if this is a hot take or not, but in my personal opinion, I think that I actually had a better time using negative than true form. Why? Because of true form stamina consumption. I know there are people who think that true form is better, and I wouldn't disagree with you, but it's just, for me personally, I've had a much better time using regular negative, purely because of how much better his stamina usage is. His fights are much more dragged out, and those are my kind of fights, which will translate into the next person I'm about to put on this list. But for now, I think that with all 3 of the factors taken into consideration, ease of use, how good he is with skill, and how easy it is to pick up, I would say I put these both at B. They're both pretty big upgrades from the first upgrade Negatail, but they're not good enough to where I put them A or A+. Okay, I won't waste your time. I'm going to put this guy in A+. The only reason that this guy isn't an S is because of difficulty of use. Because you might think that just pressing the button like 3 and 4, and then boom, you win. 3 and 2, Gaster Blaster plus sliders, easy victory. Not quite. You see, when the time that you use your 2D attack actually kind of matters. because depending on the way you play Classic Sans, you either use your two-dimensional attack right at the beginning of you entering phase 2, or right at the end. Because the time that you use it really does matter. If you use it while you're using a move, you end up just wasting stamina. And I think that's what the mistake a lot of people make. They don't wait for their attack to finish before doing that two-dimensional attack. Because if you do it at the beginning, then you're well aware that you haven't used any moves yet, you haven't wasted any stamina. If you use it at the end, then there's no moves for you to use to waste stamina on. You should only use the two-dimensional box once you have already had all of your attacks finish. Because your attacks are all automatic in this phase, besides Bone Rush. Meaning your blasters go on for a bit, and you don't have to aim them yourself. But if you just use the two-dimensional attack in the middle, all it does is just end up wasting what the value you could have gotten out of those moves. Because you didn't let them drag out, so it's, in theory, just a bunch of wasted stamina, because you could have gotten more damage had you let it be dragged out. And I think if you can understand that, then this goes an S. But if you don't, then it stays an A+, because it's still really good. Pressing 1 and 4, or 1 and 3, isn't really that difficult to do. So I think it's pretty fair to put him in A+. And with hard mode, I'd say, yeah, this one's... I'm honestly pretty torn between A and B, because his damage is really high, so he gets plus points for ease of use, and easy to pick up. He's pretty good with skill if you can aim your blasters and you know when to use your map-wide bone attack. But at the same time, his stamina usage is a little questionable. And then you also have the fact that now that his final attack isn't nearly as good as it used to be, it's kind of a lost cause unless they're really, really low, which falls under the skill category. This honestly just depends on whether you would place hard mode better than these. And would I place him better? Yeah. I don't think hard mode is in the same tier as science, negative, and negative true form. So I think it's fair for me to put him in A. He does require some skill, because if you don't lower their HP enough before the final attack, you're basically screwed. But his moves are easy enough to pick up to where you wouldn't have too much of a problem before that point. So I think having him at A is completely reasonable. It's completely reasonable. Then you have Underswap, Phase 1. This one's a C. I think the only redeeming move that he has is Spin Bones. And if you take Spin Bones out of the equation, his moves are pretty bad. His stamina usage is okay, and he's pretty easy to pick up. I'm not sure about skill, though, because, you see, even with skill, it doesn't change too much. It's mostly just relying on your aim. And I can't see myself putting him any higher. So I think C is about the fairest place to put him, because I think he's better than negative first upgrade, but I don't think he's better than Joking Aside, or good enough to be put in B tier. But see, second phase is an A for me. I would put him higher, but you do have to understand that the combos that you do with the map attacks really does matter. If you do Bone Clacker and Spin Bones, then that will give you a different result than if you used Spin Bones and Quarter Bones, or Quarter Bones and Bone Walls. The map attacks do have a cooldown now, so a global cooldown, so that's another reason why he's not A+. But he's still good enough to where he'd be A tier because of how annoying the Spin Bones are when combined with any other attack. And then you also have to factor in that you have 4 big blasters, which do a metric load of damage, similar to hard mode damage. Now, are they kind of hard to land? Yes, that is. They are pretty hard to land, but when you combine them with Orange Soul, I think you could do a lot with them, even if you just picked up his second phase. Okay, Outer. This one, I'm a little biased with this one. I want to put him at A. I really do. As an Outer main, I want to put him in A. But the thing is, this one is kind of locked behind a little bit of know-how. You have to know some combos with Outer if you want to use them effectively. Because what you don't understand is that Outer doesn't have that much stamina in Phase 2, so every move that you use heavily matters. Every move that you use, you have to know why you used it, and whether it's worth using or not. Is it difficult to use? Not necessarily, but it takes a little bit of know-how to get good with this guy. Is he good when you first pick him up? Yeah, I would say so. His black hole and supernova are pretty straightforward. You get what they do, and I'd say that understanding when to use them isn't that hard either. But it's just that know-how is what makes me unable to put him in A. At least with hard mode and underswap, you'd still be able to do something if you know what to do. Even if you don't know what your moves do, just pressing keys will do the trick. But with outer, you can't exactly do that. So I'd say putting him at B is about the fairest option to do, especially given how reliant he is on phase 2, if you're not good at outer already. Underfell. Oh boy. Do I put this one? Where do I put you? You, oh you. Underfell is a bit of an iffy one for me, because the thing is, obviously he's pretty reliant on his chain combos, but even without those chain combos, he has some pretty solid moves. His Hellblasters do a lot of damage if you can aim them right. His Bone Rush is kind of hard to see with the red Judgment Hall, and I think overall he just has a pretty solid moveset, even if you don't account for the chain combos. The reason I'm not sure on his placement is because I don't know how to feel about his final attack. His final attack now is mostly reminiscent on is mostly dependent on how many people are alive when they get to it. The difficulty of it just depends on how many people are left over. If there's one person left over, it's not as difficult, but when there's multiple people, that final attack can be really hard to dodge. Especially because you don't know where they are at all times. And so sometimes the blasters will end up, instead of hitting them, it'll hit you instead, or hit you both, which will cause in both of you taking damage because it's a really unavoidable damage, to be completely honest. And is that anyone's fault? No, not really. But it's still kind of hard to place this guy. If I had to place him, I would say he places in A. His last attack now makes it so that he's in A. If you gave me this tier list a few weeks ago before the Underfell final attack change, I'd probably put him in A and B with outer. But because of that final attack change, I'm going to put him in A. And low tier fell, I'd put him in B, because his stamina usage is not very beginner friendly, you know. Sure, he's pretty good with skill, but without that skill, you're pretty cucked, given how it's pretty severe, the stamina usage. Well, I'll say that much. Last Breath Phase 1. Where do I put him? Do I put him in S? Do I put him in A+? This is a tough one for me. I guess I'll place him in A+. If it's S, I have to know that it's S. If I know it's S, I'll just put it there right away. But the reason I put Last Breath Phase 1 this high up is because using him is extremely easy. All you have to do is plus 3, 4, and 5, and then shoot your blasters at them. It's pretty straightforward. Even if you don't have Phase 2, you can still win a good portion of games with just this alone. Why? Because you can press the numbers 3, 4, and 5 on your keyboard, which will result in you basically killing off, either killing them off or doing a good portion of their health. How much of a fan am I of that? I kind of feel it needs a little bit of a rework, since I don't like that you can just press 3 keys in that order or any order and get free damage, but hey, look, I'm not the one designing. Maybe it's a lot harder than it is. Maybe it's a lot more difficult than I portray it to be, which it probably is. But I feel like this is a fair placement for him. He's not an S for me, but he is definitely about as close as y'all get to an S. Now, Last Breath Phase 2. This one's also an A+, honestly. I feel like both of his phases are pretty solid. Now, he doesn't have stamina regen, which is kind of a problem. He doesn't have stamina regen. But it gets mitigated when you get his upgrade of doing more damage the lower stamina you have. I feel like a lot of people forget that Last Breath Phase 2 even has that feature, because Last Breath Phase 2's ability to do more damage is actually kind of useful. If you go towards the middle, right? Let's say you haven't been doing the slider technique, where you go into the middle with the blaster to delay them trying to hit you in case they're rushing you, right? And stall out the round. You can do that and then benefit off of extra damage because of just how much damage that blaster will do when you're low stamina. the amount of benefit you could get from that is really high. So even with no experience, you'd still be good at this guy if you just use a bunch of your buttons. And especially when you do know how to use them, he's really, really nice. His blasters, once you learn how to aim them, are really solid. And because of the screen flip, he's good to use even if you don't know what you're doing. Because you're going to end up walking into the blasters because of the screen flip. Now, I'll give or take, there are some people who are used to the screen flip and will just play normally anyway. But at that point, that's a really specific situation, and I feel like judging it off of that wouldn't really be fair. So I feel like this is fine. Disbelief Phase 1. Disbelief Phase 1, see, I'm not sure about this one. Because this one is pretty skill-gapped as well. His Gatling blasters can be good, but it's like mostly reliant on your aim. His blocks can be used to push people into moves, but that also requires a little bit of know-how and a little bit of skill as well. So I feel like D or C, I can't put him in the same tier as Nicotale. Because using his spin bones and the one bone spin is not too complicated of a thing to do. But there's only so much you can do with Disbelief Phase 1. I feel like his other phases, not accounting for 4, which I'll put it below it. Phase 4 is not all that great. If we're accounting for the time when you use Phase 4, he's pretty nice because, it's at the end. They won't have that much HP left over. But if we're talking about, pure how good it is on its own, it's not that great. I feel like I have to talk about these two because they're probably the weaker sides of Disbelief. Phase 2. Phase 2 is a pretty easy A+ for me. Or high A, one of those two. I'd say it's not the same as Last Breath Phase 2. I'll put it here. Because a lot of people just end up trying to rush you. It's pretty easy to use since you just spam your moves, basically, and you would still get a lot of damage. And especially if you know how to use Disbelief Phase 2, he's really, really nice. Knowing what his moves do, knowing which ones to spam, which ones to aim, that little know-how can make this guy just that much better. Along with how high damaging your moves are, and especially because of how anti-rushable you are, given, the whole high defense that they added to him. Not only do you have so much survivability with that defense, but you also have a lot of damage, basically no reason to not spam if you have Phase 3, and you basically are just super easy to use. You're easy to use, you do a lot of damage, your survivability is really high, and there's no reason for newer players to not be able to use this guy effectively. And for that reason, I'm going to keep him top of A. The only reason that I can't see myself putting him in A+ is because, admittedly, some of his moves, once people know how to dodge them, can be dodged a little easier than the ones above him. Give or take, because you're spamming, right? Unlike these, where a lot of them you kind of have... You don't have to aim these, but they're either auto or aiming them isn't as hard as this one. So I feel like top of A is completely justified. Phase 3. This one's actually kind of overrated. I used to think that this was top of the top. Peak of the peak. Like the best phase of all time. And looking back at it now, I was a little delusional. Maybe just slightly. Because it's good. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying it's bad. It's a bad phase. It's pretty good. I'd say right here. These aren't actually in order. I'm just organizing it a little better. But Disbelief Phase 3's, he's good. Now, is he the best? No. He gets countered pretty hard by a bunch of stuff, including Tail Frisk. And his moves are pretty hard to land. The only reason he's not any lower is because of Undyne and Sands. Having those extra pieces of damage to help people move is actually kind of a useful tool. Because you see that bone platform that you have? That bone platform's hitbox right now is broken. So you're basically guaranteed to get hit unless you hug the back of the wall. Which, when you do that, guess who's there to greet you? Undyne and Sands. And even if they're not in the fray, you can still attack them and do something about it. Which is pretty cool. Because then, it makes it just that much harder to avoid free damage. Now, his moves are pretty easy to dodge, and it's kind of hard for new players to use this guy since, the cooldowns and understanding the cooldowns are a bit difficult. But once you know how to use them, and if you can aim those blasters just right, and then combine them with the platforms, I think he's good enough to where he should be here. So I think B is not too bad of a rating for him. Distrust Phase 1. Distrust Phase 1 is not as bad as people think it is. A lot of people underrate this because of how much better Phase 2 is, which I kind of get, but it's just Phase 1 is really good. If you'll get guaranteed damage if you know where the bone wall comes from because of how quick it is. And your blaster and bone spin are actually kind of good. Your blaster does a lot of damage. Your bone spin spits out bones as it spins. And using this guy isn't too hard. If you spam all of your moves, because of how the special attack works, you won't have too much trouble using this guy, especially if you have Phase 2. Distrust is not that bad. He's a pretty solid option. I'd put him at B. And speaking of Distrust being pretty good, I'm going to put this guy around the same tier as Disbelief. Because not only does he have a repel, which, flings your weapon to Kingdom Come, but you also have the whole added feature of spammability with the ability to block. With the repel. The only reason I don't want to put him above Disbelief Papyrus Phase 2 is because there's less incentive to spam here as there is in Phase 2 Disbelief. With this Phase 2 Disbelief, it's kind of your only option, and you have Phase 3 to rely on, because it'll take a while. You have that in case they survive, but with Distress Phase 2, it's kind of your last resort. So, but you get more stamina and less stamina drain. So you kind of just have two sides of the same coin. But I think because of how Disbelief works and having more phases to fall back on, I feel like having this be above it is completely fair. Because Distrust Phase 2 is a lot better than I've seen people give it credit for. Especially if you know how to use Distrust Phase 2. This guy is a beast. Please do not look down on him. If you see a Distrust in your server, run away. He's gonna kill you. Swap Dust, I don't need to say much on this guy. Bone Hell is a really nice move. His survivability is extremely high because of how high his defense is and the fact that he has 2 phases. His blasters do a good bit of damage, and his moves are pretty hard to dodge if you're not that great at the game. And even if you're pretty good at the game, it can catch you off guard because of how, quick they are, to say the least. And he's pretty easy to pick up for new players, I would say. Like, as a new player, picking up Swap Dust isn't really that bad. And for an experienced player, this guy's really good. So I'd say putting him here is fair. Okay, this one's... I've seen people look down on this guy way too much. And I'm getting sick and tired of people not understanding how good Hardtail is. You have a counter, a grab move, you have a melee, blasters, ignition, and time stop. I'm not calling him overpowered, but people need to stop calling this guy bad, or you can't win games with this guy, because I have won games with him. He's really good. Not only does he not have the problem of losing stamina with your hits, but he also doesn't have the problem of lack of options. You have about as much options as you can think of. You have a melee, you have a counter, you have a grab, and you have something to take away their weapon. You have basically a whole slew of stuff in your kit that you can use. Now, the only reason I can't put him in A is because of ease of use. It takes a little know-how with him, give or take. But once you have that know-how down, this guy is a solid character. I'm sick and tired of people not realizing just how good this dude is. He needs to stop being underappreciated. He's really nice. I really like him. He is about as solid as you will get. So, B. He's like the perfect all-arounder, He has good survivability, good damage, wide range of options, and he's kind of funny. I like him. Ruins Dust. Okay. This one's I'm not too sure about. I'm mixed between B and C. Because he's good. He's pretty good. Because his fireballs are a bit RNG. But you have a melee, which I can't say for these two. This one, I guess you could call it a melee, but I don't call it that. I don't call it a melee. A melee is something you can do damage from in short range. This one's more of a 2D attack than a melee. So bonus points for having a melee. His blasters do okay damage. I guess this one just relies on how many kills you have with him. And his fireballs get pretty good later down the line, but I think just because of the ease of use to just press fireballs, bones, and bone zones, I'd say I put him in B. I can't see myself putting this at the same tier as Joking Aside or these guys, so I guess a B is pretty fair for him. Snowden. The Snowden is heavily RNG, so whether I put him in C or B doesn't really matter to me. And it hurts me because this is my favorite of the three, but I might have to put him in C. He's heavily RNG based. Sure, you could just place Bone Hell and Fireballs, but it either all of them hits or none of them hit, and that's my issue. But I can't, again, it's just because of these guys being in C, I don't want to put these guys in the same tier because I don't think it's fair. He's definitely worse than Ruins. Well, this isn't in order. I want to repeat, this isn't in order, but I can't put him below Ruins. So, but I can't put him in the same tier. So I guess bottom of B is fine. Waterfall. Okay, Waterfall is actually not as bad as people say it is now. I know it got pretty heavily nerfed, but it's not that bad. It's just not as nearly as good as it used to be. Now that the ability to get stamina from kills has been taken, it's not nearly as good as it used to be. But that doesn't make it bad. That just makes it not as good anymore, which is completely fine. If you get kills with Waterfall, you're pretty solid. And in 1v1 scenarios, due to how campy you are and how much survivability you have, I think that this guy's pretty solid. And one thing I didn't mention with Snowden is that another reason I put him in B is because of his ease of use. If you just press 4 and 5 randomly, you'll end up just figuring out how good that combo is substantially, like just normally, right? And then the same thing is with Waterfall. With Waterfall Dust, it's not too difficult to use. You have Spear Blasters, which are pretty straightforward. You have Blasters, Bone Rain, the Bone Spear, which it takes a little bit of know how to figure out what the Bone Spear does, but when you do land it, I guess it's just self-explanatory. Waterfall Dust is pretty nice. Is he good enough to be an A? No, not really. But is he a solid option? Yeah, definitely. You could do work with Waterfall if you know what you're doing. And I'm going to assume that you know what you're doing with Waterfall. You better know what you're doing. Core Dust is coming soon. You better be ready. Now we got TS Underswap, Phase 1. People like to underplay this one a lot, but I actually have gotten a pretty decent amount of kills with this guy. Just Phase 1. Because, see, I like to use TS Underswap quite a bit. And TS Underswap is a pretty solid option, I would say. If you have him maxed out, that is, which is what I'm assuming you do. Because his Cruel Bones and his Side Bones are a pretty good combo. And that's not accounting for using them with Colored Bones. Just pressing those two keys can already get you a pretty good amount of damage, right? And that's not accounting for the dogs, which are a pretty good move. The dog is a pretty good move. It does good damage, pretty reasonably spammable, and there's no harm to not using it, right? There's no harm to using it, and it doesn't change too much if you don't use it. So it's like an optional free damage card, which you have no reason not to take. So I think B is fine. But for Phase 2, I actually would put it in C. I say, as much as I hate to admit it, Phase 2 isn't as good as Phase 1. Just because it doesn't have as many guaranteed damage moves. Your Giant Spin Bone is pretty useless because of how easy it is to dodge it. Your Side Bones are your only real good move, but even then, relies on how well you can use your Colored Bones. And depending on how quickly you activated this Phase 2, you either blocked your way here, or you got here on complete accident. Which, if you got here by complete accident, then you're probably at below half. Which, if you're low HP with this guy, that's not the best. He has a lot of stamina, so his survivability is okay, but his damage and reliability of getting hits isn't high enough for me to put him in B. So I think just having him here is fair. Now, I don't want to waste too much of your time, so I'm just going to get the obvious ones out of the way first. Bad Time Trio goes in S, Time Paradox goes in S. I don't need to waste your time with those two. It's pretty self-explanatory why they're in S. Just spamming your moves is good enough. Time Paradox, if both of you just use Bone Walls, hell, even if one of you used it, it's going to be a nightmare. That Time Trio, I mean, it takes a little bit more skill, but come on, really? Just using your moves is good enough. If one of you uses Bone Jump and the other one just uses Blasters or Spin Bones, that's about all you need, really. Those are pretty obvious S's, and you can win even if you don't know what you're doing. I'm gonna glance over a few here because I don't want to waste too much of your time. I'm gonna put Dust Belief in A+, for obvious reasons. I'm gonna place Jekko Phase 2 in A, only because of the curse that binds all their HP together. It is RNG to get that curse, but assuming you get it, then you are pretty much in a good position because of how you have a lot of map attacks with this guy. Pretty reliable map attacks, and you have 3 curses. All 3 of them are pretty good. You have a blinding curse, a curse that binds all of them together, so each one takes damage, hurts all of the players, or you have a 3rd curse which makes you hide and get stamina back. No matter which one of the curses you get, they're all really nice curses to have. Does he need balancing? Yes, absolutely, but until he gets that rework and remodel, he's gonna stay there. Sent as a B. He's okay. If you know how to use him, he's pretty good. And even if you don't, his frost is really nice. Just the fact that you can guarantee a kill if you lure someone enough, it's pretty handy. It's a pretty nice thing to have. Glitchtail, I'm gonna put him at C. He's not that great. I don't think I need to elaborate on this one. Underswap, C. It just depends on how, because he's a really campy character. If people are rushing you, then he's pretty good, but other than that, he's not that great. Underverse is not that much better, but with skill, I feel like putting him in B is fair. Jacko's a D. His stamina usage is not that great. His moves aren't guaranteed to hit all the time, and he doesn't really have any reliable moves, so I feel like putting him here is about the fairest thing I can do. I feel like that's about it, really. Now, since there isn't a red, like Phase 1 and Phase 2, I'll just use red together. Red is an A. It's just so easy to spam all of your moves and get free damage, and your second phase is really, really good. Even if you don't use the 2 things in the back, you still have a lot of spammability with it, because it's more so reliant on how quick they delete your HP, which you do lose your HP pretty quickly with red, but that's if they can hit you. If you just spam your moves, there's a good chance they won't hit you, which is the best part. And that's without you using your 2 sentinels that you have in your arsenal, which is pretty funny, I think. I like to use Red's Phase 2 just for Power of Neo, because I really like that song. And then, if there's any one I want to put, then it's just, I guess, Bonewalker. I'll put him in high A. The only reason he's not an S is because the grab move, which is one of your better moves, takes a little bit of skill to use. Aiming it is kind of hard. Kind of, I say, because it's not hard to land. It just takes a while to figure out how small that hitbox really is. But once you figure that out, you're pretty solid. And again, I don't want to waste too much of your time, so I'm just going to skim through the rest of these. Fell Swap Emerald, he goes B. He's pretty easy to use and really good when you do know how to use him. Same thing with Horror. Horror is a solid choice. He has melee, he has good range options, and his hunger is pretty nice, but the reason he's not an A is because of how it does take a bit of know-how to use this guy. Same thing with After. After is pretty solid. His moves are... I do think he needs a rework, but I don't think he needs it more than a lot of the other characters, so I think B is fine. His moves are pretty good. They do a great amount of damage. They have pretty relative difficulty to dodge, and with skill, this guy's pretty good. Revenge, I'm not sure, really. His damage is really high, but if you can't aim very well, then your blasters are basically useless, and you have to rely on your bombs, and your colors spinning bones. And how good those are, again, depends on you. which is why I feel like he's B. If this was about how hard it is to grind him, he would be here. He sucks when you don't have FL. But since I'm taking max upgrades, I feel like putting him in B is about as reasonable as it will get. Story Shift Kara, B. People like to diss on this a lot, but I think it's pretty good. Story Shift Kara is solid. You just need to get better at it. LOL. Please get better at this, because Story Shift Kara is actually a decent character. Same thing with Phase 2. Phase 2 is not as good as Phase 1 in my opinion, but it's still not horrible. If you just use your moves, you'll still be able to get around. Same with Story Shift. But when you have skill, is where Story Shift Kara really shines. Which is why I feel B is the perfect place for them. Killer Sands I can't put in B. And the only reason I can't put Killer Sands in B is because of one, your blasters are relatively slow. 2, your save and load heavily relies on how skilled you are with it. And 3, your only guaranteed damage move besides your Bone Rush, if you can aim it right, is your Homicide, which happens when you're low stamina. And it's more so a final resort than anything else. Oh yeah, by the way, 6 bones goes here. Insanity, also C. Insanity's not that great. His Bone Rush is pretty good, give or take, because it does a lot of damage. It does a lot of damage, and you have good melee options. But I feel like he's just not versatile enough. Him not having a blaster is a pretty big downside. And while it doesn't make him bad, it just doesn't make him great. It makes him okay, at best. Which is what this tier is, by the way. They're okay. They're not horrible. But you could find better choices. Insanity hard mode. People like to downplay this guy a lot. People say he's trash, and people say he's bad and needs a buff. I say he's good. Pretty good. If you know what you're doing, he's awesome in A tier. But if you don't, then he's B. The ability to just teleport around the map and use Bone Rush 4 times in one move is really underrated. You could kill someone with just 1 Bone Rush, let alone having 4 at the same time that you can teleport and have covered the entire map. You have a rage mode that can basically one-shot most Karas, if not all of them. Now, it is pretty easy to dodge, but if you can use it properly, then it's pretty effective. I mean, otherwise, you could just use it to, stall out for time, and you can still use your other moves while doing it. Your Bone Zone is pretty huge. Your Bone Attack is also pretty huge and has pretty decent range. And your Bone Rain is pretty handy to have. It's kind of like Falling Bones for Outer. Although it doesn't, just without the added side effect of making them lose their ability to jump. Which is okay, honestly. Fresh C. I would put him in B if it wasn't for how skill heavy this guy is. If you're not good at Fresh, he's not that great. But if you're good with him, he's pretty solid. You could probably win games with this guy. You just need to be good with him, which not a lot of people are. Epic's either a C or a B. I'm thinking put him at C. He's not bad, that's for sure. I can tell you that much. He's not bad. He's just not all that great, because his blasters, although they do a lot of damage, and Epic's damage is really nice and an underrated part of Epic, it's not good enough to carry because of just how well people know his moves now. People know when they see your blaster to walk away. If they don't, then guess what? If you miss your blasters, the most that you'll do damage is the explosion of the Gaster Blaster, which doesn't do nearly as much damage as you think it does. So I'd say he's a C. You could make an argument for him being in B, but I don't see him being the same level as Outer or Hardtail Sands or Ruins Dust. So I think C is fine. Possessed Flowey, B. Possessed Sands has really good AoE. He has good map control. His damage is pretty good. And his damage is really good, actually. He has really good damage. Good map control, pretty easy to pick up, and really good with skill. But he's not good enough when you pick him up for me to put him in A, So I feel like having him in B, it's good enough. Same thing with 3DBB. 3DBB is pretty solid, even if you don't know what to do with him, if you just use your moves willy-nilly. But he's not good enough to where you could just win games by pressing buttons. It does take some know-how of how your moves work. And his Soul Sword is a really good melee. I don't know, this one's probably the closest one to being A. Besides, like, Hardtail and Outer. This one's probably the closest one to being A tier. I don't know, he could be A, but I don't want to put him in A tier, so I'm going to keep him B. Horafel, really good damage. Pretty decent AoE. Pretty good moves. B. Ice Sands. Okay, last one. Ice Sands. B. I want to put him higher, but I can't. His moves are not too great, and it does take a little bit of know-how with Ice Sands to really do much with him, right? And the only reason I'm not putting him lower is because, one, how he's really good if you know how to use him, and two, his Sub-Zero negates one of the best abilities in the game, DT, making it so you don't have a second life. And that not having that second life is such a big help in a game, because being able to remove one of the most important features of a Chorus team user automatically puts you pretty high up on the list. Which not a lot of other characters, or really if any, can do that here. And the only other one that can, Insanity and Insanity Hard Mode, I rate pretty high, because they reduce your HP when you spawn in again. But Ice Sands is the only one, to my knowledge, to be able to completely stop you from coming back. Which is why I think this is B. And, well, this is my completed tier list of ULC. You can disagree, you can tell me how you feel, it's whatever, you know. It's all just my opinion, and you can feel free to disagree if you want, agree if you